What's going on YouTube? It's Teach, back again with another video, and today we're handing out off-season grades for the 4 NFC East teams. We're going to follow it up later on this week with the AFC East, but excited to bring this video your way. Hopefully you guys enjoy. Hit that like button if you do. Subscribe if you're new to the channel. I want to see more football content like this. And of course, leave me your thoughts down below in the comment section. Who had the best offseason of the teams in the NFC East, and what would you grade the Cowboys, the Eagles, the Commanders, and the Giants for their respective drafts, free agencies, trades, all that sorts of fun stuff. Love to hear your thoughts down below. This is just my thoughts. Love to hear yours in the comments section. But we're going to go ahead and jump right into it, starting with the Dallas Cowboys. They went 12-5 last year, second best team in the NFC East. And, free agency, C+ may seem kind of harsh, but this was a team that was mostly keeping its infrastructure in place, and then its big moves came via trade. And I don't include like a trade for Stephon Gilmore and a Brandon Cooks into free agency. I'm focusing solely here on signing, so made it a little tough when it came to best signing. So I decided to do the franchise tag with Tony Pollard, and I'll kind of circle back to this when we get to the Giants. I just love that way of doing business. Handing out a big time contract to a running back can be a little tricky, right? Like, running backs kind of nowadays are dime a dozen, right? So there are some special running backs like a Saquon Barkley, and Tony Pollard when he's on the field is awesome, but Pollard's coming off an injury. Barkley, do you hand him the big time contract and then he, kind of takes the step in the wrong direction, or, injuries catch up, and basically the Cowboys are looking to avoid what happened to them with Zeke Elliott, right? Like, you don't want to hand out that big-time contract and then this running back hit a wall. So I love that way of doing business. You get another year of Tony Pollard, get to see what he looks like, one, off the injury, and two, as the main headline of a committee. That's going to be a new role for him. Is he just nice as a complimentary piece, or can he be that number one guy in a committee? We're going to find out. I'm excited to see what Pollard looks like, and if he's back to 100%, I think he's a guy worth keeping around. Again, it just comes down to the right price point for a long-term extension. But to get Pollard back, and again, this was a team that didn't have a whole lot of true free agent signings that really wowed me. Thought about re-signing of Donovan Wilson. He's coming off a good year, and he's been playing some good safety for him. So thought about that, but decided to go with the franchise tag of Tony Pollard. NFL draft. This was an NFL draft that I wasn't crazy about. I'll go with Mozzie Smith just because, I wasn't as high on Mozzie Smith as others. I liked Keanu Benton more than Smith, but, there was the first round hype out there. He's a freaky athlete. It felt like he was trending in towards that late first round territory. And between the Chiefs and the Cowboys and the Saints, I like the idea of him playing next to Chris Jones in Kansas City. I understood the need, maybe if he made it to New Orleans. But for Dallas, I was like, man, with how much they move defensive linemen, they utilize stunts and twists, Mozzie Smith's athleticism would actually be a great addition. Plus, he has just more natural run-stopping, space-eating ability than someone who's a little bit slighter built like an Osa Odighizuwa. So he kind of caters perfectly to the need that they have right now, while also being a perfect schematic fit given how well he is, or how high of an athlete he is, and how well he can play on the move. And this is going to be a defensive line that moves him around and asks him to do those stunts and twists. So this could be potentially a rookie who plays all three downs because of that. He's got the early down factor of being able to stop the run, but he's a good athlete, and he showcased some promise as a pass rusher. So I see no reason to take him off the field unless you have some really interesting ideas for Tank Lawrence and Micah Parsons. And I'm sure there's times where he'll be rotated off. But nevertheless, I think this is a guy who can see the field, and see the field a lot for Dallas, and address one of the few needs that they've had a hard time addressing over the last handful of seasons at the interior defensive line spot. C+ overall. I like DeMarvin Overshown. He would have been my honorable mention here. Luke Schoonmaker was a bit of a reach for me, but I do like the Mozzie Smith fit, and if he was going to go in the first round, Dallas was my preferred landing spot for him. And then offseason grades. So you're going to be like C+, and it jumps up to a B+. What the hell is that about? Well, this is where I factor in those trades, and that's why, Brandon Cooks, Stephon Gilmore, they're in these pictures for a reason. I mean, this was a team that didn't really have an Amari Cooper replacement. Well, Brandon Cooks certainly is that. And it's the team that had room to add one more corner. I think they would have been fine with Jaron Bland playing on the outside and rolling with, Jordan Lewis for another year. And, it would have been Trevon Diggs and then, an okay motley of crew the rest of the way. But by getting Stephon Gilmore in a defense that plays a lot of man coverage, he's still got gas in the tank. We saw that last year in Carolina. This is we're trying to win a Super Bowl. We are going to make no excuses for this roster. We're going to be star-studded all the way around while also having a lot of depth. And I think that's where this Dallas seems interesting, right? They don't have the elite quarterback, but if you took this roster and just put it in Kansas City, you'd be like, wow, I mean, how did teams beat this, squad? Because they have star power, they have depth, they have the quarterback. Dak, as much as I like him, he is probably, he's that tier 2, tier 3 guy for most people versus a tier 1 elite, no doubt, type of elite starter and superstar starter. So Brandon Cooks only solidifies that by giving you a clear-cut Amari Cooper replacement, that number 2 guy. And he's also that over-the-top weapon that this team, got with T.Y. Hilton at the end of last year, but now you have it, I think, an even better version with Brandon Cooks. So he's kind of feeling 2 shoes at once, and then you go back to Stephon Gilmore. Now you have a top-flight number 2 cornerback opposite of Trevon Diggs, who's this star, maybe superstar-level cornerback. And then Deron Bland moves into the slot. I feel that much better about that secondary. So these 2 veteran additions came at a low cost, but they solidify strengths on this roster. Well, at least the secondary side for Gilmore, and it takes the wide receiver room by the addition of Brandon Cooks from pretty good, has one elite guy in CeeDee Lamb to now that is a formidable duo with Lamb and Cooks. So this just made this from a really good roster to one of the best rosters when you assess them without the quarterback position in play. And I, again, like Dak Prescott, so we'll get to see what he gets to do with these newfound weapons on the roster. So B+ overall. Offseason great. I think this team, specifically with those 2 trades, really did improve their standings and maybe give themselves a chance to steal the NFC East away from Philadelphia. This is a division that doesn't have a repeat champ in some time now, so maybe Dallas could continue that trend. Biggest question mark left, I'll go linebacker. Maybe interior offensive line, right? Like what happened to Tyron Smith gets hurt. Tyler Smith is to shift out wide. Is Terrence Steele the same guy over at right tackle pre-injury? So there's some question marks on the O-line for sure. But to me, linebacker is that spot where I like the idea of bringing Leighton Vander Esch back. And if they just want to bring him back on 1-year deals every offseason, I don't mind that way of doing business. Then it comes down to Damone Clark or Jabril Cox. Either one of these former LSU Tigers, I think, has a spot and a chance to step up into a starting position. Right now, Damone Clark is, the R-Lad starter, but I could see where it's Jabril Cox, 4th-round pick from 2 years ago. Damone Clark, day 3 pick from last year's draft, the 2022 class, that is. So either one of these guys, I could see a world where they step up and become a solid starter. They each have their reasons for why they fell to the day 3, portion of the NFL draft, but I could also see why a team like Dallas is willing to take a shot, especially at that point in the draft. So you have Leighton Vander Esch, who I think is going to be the best off-ball linebacker this team has, and he played a really good year last year. Now can Damone Clark or Jabril Cox step up and be a solid number 2? If they get that, then this is going to be one of the best defenses in football, maybe even the best unit in football. Then we get to the New York Giants. A surprising team for me last year. I had somebody comment on my record predictions from last year, and where I can pat myself on the back saying the Eagles are going to go 13-4. They end up going 14-3 if memory serves. They were even better than I thought, and I felt like I was ahead of the curve saying this is going to be a team that is going to be a force to be reckoned with. I was very far off on the Giants, though. I think I said they would go 4-13. So this is a surprise team for me, and I think across the league, it surprised a lot of people. A ton of credit to Brian Dable and Joe Shane, rather, and the work that they did in the offseason really transformed this roster. And sometimes just that change in culture, you start to see talent a little bit more present on the roster. I think that was true for Saquon Barkley. I think it was true for Daniel Jones to an extent. But they finished 3rd in the division, but did make the playoffs, win a wild card game in Minnesota. That's super impressive. Free agency, another team that didn't do a whole lot, and again, I'm not factoring the Darren Waller trade. We'll talk about that later on. But, it's bringing back Sterling Shepard, it's re-signing Darius Slayton, it's signing Paris Campbell, it's, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Bobby Okereke, that's a solid signing, but I'm not super crazy about that, at least with what I think that fit's going to look like. Maybe he'll prove me wrong, but right now I'm kind of lukewarm on that. So best signing, I'll say franchise tag Saquon Barkley again. You're avoiding the potential Zeke Elliott disaster while keeping one of the best running backs in football on your roster. And hey, if he proves it for another year, he can stay healthy, and he is one of those best running backs. And him and Daniel Jones is that backfield duo, so to speak, you want long term. Well, then we can talk about the long term extension once we get there. But this was another kind of like, hey, pseudo prove it, because we know Barkley's legit, but it's like, can you stay healthy? Can you produce on that level? And if push comes to shove and he walks and he goes elsewhere, well, then you got 5 years now of awesome Saquon Barkley, or 6 years now of awesome Saquon Barkley, as opposed to 1 year less. So either way you spin it, I think it's just good business. You keep a good player on your roster, and then we'll see what happens next offseason. The NFL draft, this was one of my favorite drafts of the entire NFL draft. I mean, this was one of my favorite classes. Deonte Banks is probably my favorite first-round pick. It was just a perfect scheme fit for Wink Martindale. Love the fact that he fell that far. I mean, I wish Deonte Banks went earlier because I think he's deserving of it, but for the Giants' sake, I mean, he fell right into their lap. They move up a spot, they get their guy. And now Wink Martindale has him and Adoree Jackson. It feels like he's got the horses to run that defense that he wants to run. But even further down the list, John Michael Schmitz. If they took him in the first round, nobody's batting an eyelash. Jalen Hyatt maybe would have surprised me because I saw Hyatt as a second-round guy, but they get him in the 3rd. So in a wide receiver room that, yes, has a lot of slider-built guys, I could see a world where Wan'Dale Robinson wins the slot role and Sterling Shepard maybe becomes the do-it-all guy, and then Jalen Hyatt maybe is the difference maker. And that over-the-top speed, plays more than maybe a Sterling Shepard, or maybe it's just easier to integrate into the offense for Brian Daboll. However it plays out, I could see him being the new addition or the re-signing the wide receiver spot that ultimately makes the biggest difference, which we'll come back to later on when we talk about Jalen Hyatt, the biggest question mark left. Offseason grade, I'll go A-, and because I haven't talked about it, I'll say the Darren Waller trade is my favorite move. It's a very low-risk, type of proposition. You give up pick 100. Yeah, it's a top 100 pick, but by the slimmest of margins. And you get a guy that can be, when he's healthy, one of the best tight ends in football, a great weapon over the middle of the field where Daniel Jones targets the field a ton. So he feels like a perfect addition to this offense, and it allows them to kind of replicate, even if none of these other wide receivers step up, to maybe replicate what Kansas City has, where the tight end is that number one volume target, and then you just kind of have complementary pieces around that. That could be what the Giants are working towards, rather. And I could see where, if he stays healthy, this becomes one of the best, offseason moves and one of the biggest steals of the past offseason. So, yeah, I like that move a ton. And again, low risk, but potential high reward. And if it doesn't work out, well, then, you're out pick 100. Okay, I think you can bounce back from that and be able to replace that type of production with, a future win right in the NFL draft or free agency. So, again, low risk, high reward there with Darren Waller. Biggest question mark left, wide receiver. And I say that pretty comfortably, right? Because Sterling Shepard, again, I think he can be the kind of do-it-all guy, but I don't know how much he wows me. Darius Slayton has had some moments, had some flashes, but it's never really come together. Paris Campbell often injured. And then it's like, okay, well, can Jalen Hyatt be that guy? You drafted in the 3rd round. Felt like there was some love for him to go earlier. I saw him as a 2nd rounder. Could he be that guy? And Brian Daboll, if he's just focused on him being the vertical guy, well, maybe that's not the case, but maybe they're saying, hey, we can use him as a yak guy, and he's not just going to be a deep threat, but he's going to be one of the best deep threats in football, so he's going to open it up more for Darren Waller and Sterling Shepard, and maybe he's the true kind of gravitational force that opens everything else up because he draws so much attention. I could see a world where that happens, or maybe he's just better than a 3rd round wide receiver, proves to be a stud, and proves to be one of the best, the best sleeper picks in the NFL draft. Who knows? We haven't seen the guy on the field yet, so if there is reason for optimism, I'm going to put that in the guy I haven't seen yet versus Sterling Shepard, who's been, okay in New York. Slayton's had his moments. Paris Campbell's new, but I've seen what he looks like in the league. That's why I kind of put Jalen Hyatt as the guy here, maybe who breaks out in the wide receiver room versus some of the other guys for the Giants. All right, next up, the Philadelphia Eagles. Yep, 14-3. They won the division, number 1 seed, make it all the way to the Super Bowl. Free agency grade A-. I think it could have been an A, but Jason Kelsey's making a lot of money now. Fletcher Cox, $10 million a year. Felt like they I don't want to say overpaid because those guys are still good, but they paid a little bit of a tax, just a small tax, to keep those guys in-house. And also just naturally you're gonna have a little bit of a loss somewhere, and Chauncey Gardner-Johnson was a big piece of that defense for why it was so good last year. He's now in Detroit. I'm not factoring in the coordinators here, but you could even have that be a part of the reason why it's maybe an A- versus an A. I'm not factoring that in, but if you do, I totally understand that. But naturally there was gonna be some loss because everybody wants to take from the roster that made it to a Super Bowl, right? But they did a good job mostly keeping those pieces in place. But to me, Jalen Hurts, that extension, I've always been higher on Hurts than most. I've always kind of been a believer that he can eventually get there, and now I think he's worth the money that he's getting. And I still think it's a contract that gives him enough flexibility to move money around and have a pretty solid roster around him. But I think last year he proved he's worth that extension. So I'm glad they went ahead and they got that taken care of, because don't need any more Lamar situations on our hands, right? Then we get to the NFL draft. I don't give out A+ as often, but yeah, A+. I mean, this was one of the best draft classes from this past year. Just steal after steal after steal. Decided to go Jalen Carter's the best pick, but you could have sold me in any number of directions. I looked back at their class, and I think there was surplus value on every selection. Like, I could have seen Tyler Steen going earlier. I could have seen Sidney Brown coming off the board earlier. Love where they got Tanner McKee. I'm a Tanner McKee guy. He's obviously going to be a backup, but still great value. And then Moro Ojomo in the 7th round. If you're asking me for the best value pick, I'd probably say that, because I thought Ojomo easily should have been somewhere in that 3rd round conversation. He ends up going round 7. I don't know why. But, Jalen Carter, Nolan Smith's another great value pick there at, 30. But Jalen Carter next to Jordan Davis is going to be, a tailor-made fit. We got to see it in college. We know it looks, great with those two guys next to one another. I think it's going to play out in a lot of the same ways for Philadelphia. Jordan Davis can be the guy who mostly focuses on the run stopping with some pass rush upside, and then Jalen Carter's a little bit of the reverse, but he's also really good against the run. And also, I just think this is good, ecosystem for Jalen Carter to be drafted into, given everything he went through this offseason. He's got a lot of his former teammates there, which hopefully, steers him in the right direction versus the opposite direction, right? But yeah, I mean, I just think fit-wise, that's the slam dunk there. City Brown, you could even sell me on that because I'm not crazy about Terrell Edmonds. I can see City Brown becoming an impact starter for that defense right away. Offseason grade, I'll just go with the entire 2023 draft as the biggest win, but the Hurts extension, bringing back those veterans, any one of these moves could have been, a selection. It's an easy A to give out. I mean, I think this was easy, one of the best, maybe the best, offseason for any team across the league. Free agency was awesome. Draft was great. They took care of their own while also bringing in new pieces. Had some turnover at coordinator, so maybe that's what keeps it from an A+, if you think that maybe they deserve that. But nonetheless, even the guys that are replacing, Gannon and Steichen, I think they have some okay options, one that's in-house and the one they brought from outside house, but still think that defense is going to look relatively the same nevertheless. But nonetheless, this is one of the best rosters in football, so this next question got kind of hard. Biggest question mark left, I'll go linebacker, but, I like Nakobe Dean, thought he should have gone earlier than the third round 2 drafts ago, 2022. So I think they got surplus value on that, selection, and I could see a world where he steps into a starting role and is a really good player for them. Good blitzer, solid tackler. It's a little small, but also has a ton of range, good athleticism. Again, I could see a world where he becomes a more than impact level player, like a plus level starter for this defense, especially with a year of experience now under his belt. So if Dean steps into that role and is anywhere near average or better, one of the best defenses in football without a doubt. One of the best teams in football without a doubt. Last thing we're going to talk about, the Washington Commanders. Yeah, this was a little bit of a trickier one because their offseason kind of played as the inverse of how I felt about Philadelphia's, where, I just couldn't really get behind a whole lot of it. 8-9 year last year, 4th in division. Ron Rivera always is this team competitive. And I do think there's enough roster, in-house, right? Like the defensive line's really good, and Kendall Fuller's a solid player, and Terry McLaurin, one of the best wide receivers in football. The offensive line's had its ups and downs, but mostly, intact unit. They have some good running backs. Generally, I think this team can stay competitive. We were just kind of waiting for them to see what could be the move that takes them to the next level, right? Like, what could be that move that takes them over the hump? And I don't think they found it this offseason, unfortunately, for Washington fans. C- for free agency. I didn't love Andrew Wiley's signing. I thought Sam Cosmi should stay at tackle, but even him moving to guard, is Wiley, he was fine in Kansas City. Maybe you think he's really starting to figure it out. I just think you're maybe getting an average tackle, if that, which, how much is that a priority signing? Is that something you needed to do early on in free agency? I would say no. Nick Gates, I think, can be a good player, but he's coming off an injury, has some flexibility, can play guard, can play center, which is nice. I could see a world where he's their starting left guard, so call him their best signing. Deron Payne's a good player, but that's a lot of money to pay a second defensive tackle, and you're already paying, Jonathan Allen, like I said. You're coming up on the decision of having to pay Montez Sweat and Chase Young. Like, Deron Payne's, again, a good player, but I don't know if I want to be the catalyst for the defensive line and defensive tackle market in specific blowing up like what I think the Commanders kind of ultimately opened the door to, especially when I'm already paying one of those guys like Jonathan Allen, and I have to make the decision of paying 2 edge rushers. Like, it feels like Deron Payne easily could have been the odd man out, but now they position themselves where it's going to be Sweat, who's been one of the most underrated players in football, in my opinion, or Chase Young, a guy they took at number 2 overall. Battled injuries, albeit, but a guy they took at number 2 overall ahead of Justin Herbert. So it just, not a bad player whatsoever, but that contract was one that I couldn't fully get behind. Then moving on to the draft, I didn't love the Emmanuel Forbes selection. Quan Martin's a good player, but it felt like they doubled down in secondary where, yeah, they can get better, but they're also failing to address other areas on the roster. Ricky Stromberg, I could see a world where he's their starting center week 1. I really could. Maybe we'll see what happens with Jace Rollier, right? But Stromberg could become that starting center. Gates plays guard. Gates another contender to be that starting center, so we'll have to wait and see. But, I didn't hate that value. That was one of those picks where him or Braden Daniels, the tackle/guard they drafted from Utah in the 4th round. Those were like the 2 picks where I was like, the value was about as close to me getting on board with it as it possibly came. So I thought about Daniels here. He's the honorable mention, but decided to go with Stromberg, considering did take him in the first 3 rounds of the draft. Overall offseason grade, C-. Don't worry about the best overall move. That's not Byron Murphy. If I had to put one on the spot here, I'd say shoring up offensive line with depth. So ignore Byron Murphy. That's obviously a typo. The graphics guy sucks. But shoring up the interior offensive line, because they did bring in Stromberg and Gates and, Wiley's an option. I don't know how great of an option, but he's an option. And then also, Braden Daniels, who I mentioned earlier on. So they did a lot to try to add to the specifically interior offensive line. I think a lot of those options could become viable starting pieces. Again, more so focused on the interior offensive line because Wiley, I'm not too sure about him at tackle, but it does allow Sam Cosmi to move inside to play guard where he might be even better. Biggest question mark left has got to be corner. And Forbes is going to be the guy that has to step up, right? Like, you drafted him over Christian Gonzalez, Deontay Banks, Joey Porter Jr., all guys I had ranked higher than him. But I could see a world where you're saying, hey, he's got the length, he's kind of got these body traits that say man coverage specialist, but played in a zone-heavy defense, had a great feel for being able to read the quarterback and break on the football and create some turnovers, take it back the other way 6 times in his career. 6 times for pick sixes, that is, 14 career interceptions, 17 career PBUs at Mississippi State. Like, there's a lot to like there. I just worry about that college production, how it may not transfer to the NFL level. I mean, I think the NFL schemes are a little bit more complicated, right? They're not as easy to jump and read and anticipate that throw coming. Quarterbacks are harder to understand and read. And yeah, he was great in zone coverage, but doing that at Mississippi State is just a little bit different than just figuring and assuming he's going to fit into that Del Rio, cover 3. He does have that good coverage feel, so maybe I'm wrong and maybe I'm underselling that. But I just don't think it's going to be as smooth as a transition as I think the Commanders assume it will be, given they took him again over Christian Gonzalez, over Deontay Banks, over Joey Porter Jr., who I think you look at their college tape and it's just... I can't get on board with Forbes being better than those 3 guys, but that's just my opinion. Also, of course, you have the weight concerns. They also have Cam Dantzler on the roster. So Dantzler or Forbes, one of these 2 needles, might step up and become a solid outside cornerback. I'm actually a little more optimistic maybe about Dantzler because I thought he's had some flashes. Forbes is a true question mark, though, so that's what makes it hard to make that decision. But, guys, that is going to do it for my NFC East offseason grades. Let me know what you think down below in the comment section. Where was I right? Where was I wrong? What are your thoughts on these 4 teams and their respective offseasons, from the draft to the free agency period to trades they made? Love to hear any and all thoughts you have on these 4 squads down below in the comments section. That's going to do it for me. Hope you all have a fantastic rest of your day.